Just going to run this dog to see if we can find any type of human remains that are left.
Listen to Where Secrets Go to Die, The Disappearance of Derek Hennigan. From the Detroit Free Press, a new podcast set in the woods of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Available on Apple, Spotify, Freep.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, the BuckeyeXtra podcast with Rob Aller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to a Monday, April 29th edition of the BuckeyeXtra Football Podcast. This is a two-man episode. This is Joey Kaufman. I'm joined by Bill Rabinowitz. We are talking about Ohio State's NFL draft performance, storylines. It was a lighter draft than usual for the Buckeyes. Only 4 guys were selected, which was the lowest since 2013. Marvin Harrison Jr. was the headliner on Thursday night, going to the Arizona Cardinals at 4th overall, as expected. But the number of guys who got picked was lower than it generally has been, and largely because I guess a lot of them could be picked next year.
Yeah, this was the fewest since 13 when Jonathan Hankins went in the 2nd round, John Simon in the 4th, and Reed Fragel in the 7th. Hankins and Simon had pretty nice NFL careers. Hankins still playing, and a terrific career. So, yeah, Joey, your point is that's exactly right. You know, this could have been a double-digit year for Ohio State. So next year will be. Next year, I mean, we were kind of going through this. There could be like 20 guys that are drafted. I mean, I know it sounds preposterous, but I don't think it is.
I'll take
20 Ohio State players that could go in next year's draft. I mean, I don't know if that particular number might be a little bit high, but it's going to be, I would say, mid-teens is a pretty good bet.
Yeah, I mean, you factor in all the seniors, all the juniors who came back for their senior year, the extra year eligibility, the transfers, guys like somebody like Will Howard, if he ends up being the starter, and even if he's not, I would think we get drafted. Either way, you look at somebody like Quinshon Judkins who transferred. So a lot of guys, a lot of volume. Bill, before we talk big picture, maybe about next year's class or just this class as a whole, do you want to go over? Kind of maybe go through each of the guys. Marvin going 4th overall to Arizona. That's not a huge surprise, but still, I think for him and for Ohio State, certainly a nice moment because you thought maybe there was a slight chance that Malik Neighbors from LSU could eclipse it for that number 1 receiver spot, but Marvin ends up being the first receiver taken. He ends up being the highest drafted Ohio State receiver of all time. They've, in the last couple of years, certainly had a run of first-round wide receivers, starting 2 years ago with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson breaking a 15-year drought where Ohio State hadn't produced a first-round receiver. Those guys go. Then Jackson Spin-the-Jigba goes last year. Then Marvin goes higher than all of them.
Yeah, he was Marvin Harrison Jr. was the highest drafted receiver ever. The next highest was Terry Glenn, who went, I believe, is 7th in 96. 7th in 96 to the Patriots. We've thought, and the consensus has been that Marvin Harrison would be the first non-quarterback taken in the draft. That was as early as last year at this time. And so that actually happened. There was some kind of talk that maybe he wouldn't be the first non-quarterback taken, but in the end, Arizona picked him. You know, he'll be Kyler Murray's primary target, I would think. I mean, look, that's been a bad franchise. That's why they drafted him last. He'll be reunited with Paris Johnson Jr. with the Cardinals. I'm sure that'll be a nice thing. Yeah, he's a terrific player. I mean, he's as close. I said this on a Phoenix radio station right after the draft, that he's as close to a flawless draft prospect that I can recall. I mean, find the weakness in his game. I mean, he had a couple drops last year, but nobody really is going to question his hands. He's got, he's fast enough. He's got great hands. He's got an incredible work ethic. That's probably the thing that separates him more than anything else is the work ethic. I mean, how many times do we go into the Woody for whatever reason and it's empty except for Marvin with the Monarch machine, kid running routes, catching passes. I mean, they had to kick him out of the building sometimes, or at least not let him, use the finger code to get in. So, Congratulations to him. We've talked many times about how, as the son of a Hall of Famer, he probably didn't have to work that hard. He had, pretty comfortable upbringing, but you never know it by the way he works. And he has every reason to think that he can be as good as his father. And, it's hard to say he can be better than a Pro Football Hall of Famer. But, who's going to say no?
Just going to run this dog to see if we can find any type of human remains that are left.
Listen to Where Secrets Go to Die, The Disappearance of Derek Hennigan. From the Detroit Free Press, a new podcast set in the woods of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Available on Apple, Spotify, Freep.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, I think for him, the other thing with him being the son of a Hall of Famer, it had an effect on the way he prepared for this draft, because it was fairly atypical, certainly not unheard of.
Very atypical. Unprecedented.
Well, I would maybe hold off on that, because, a couple years ago, Chase Young didn't work out at the...
Yeah, I'm talking about everything. He didn't even talk.
Right.
Worker didn't even talk to the media.
So it was a very unusual pre-draft process in which he did not speak at the Combine. He met with teams at the Combine, didn't work out at the Combine, and then didn't work out at Ohio State's Pro Day, and didn't run the 40, didn't catch passes, didn't do any of that stuff at the Pro Day, didn't do a single thing. And it didn't seem to hurt him. It didn't seem like the NFL made a big stink about that. And I think probably the fact that he was doing it at the encouragement by his father, Marvin Harrison Sr., who's a Hall of Famer, I think probably made it less into a storyline than it otherwise could have been, or maybe affected his draft status. Because Malik Neighbors went out and ran a blazing fast 40-yard dash time. But I think it didn't hurt him, and it's probably going to help him make an impact right away as a Rookie of the Year candidate. And Ohio State's had a lot of Rookie of the Year guys in recent years.
Yep.
C.J. Stroud last year, Garrett Wilson 2 years ago. So it certainly would seem like that gamble paid off, and he's going to be able to hit the ground running for Arizona, and I think going to have a good chance to be as impactful from day one as any rookie in this draft.
And then you move to the three other players drafted. The next two found, for different reasons, very good landing spots. Mike Hall Jr., because he's a Streetsboro guy. It's about 30 miles from Cleveland. He goes to the Browns with their first pick, second round pick, but the Browns' first pick, the Deshaun Watson trade they kept on giving. So Mike Hall plays for his hometown team. Grew up a Browns fan, as he said at the combine, even when they weren't good, and they weren't good for a long time. And they made the playoffs last year before bowing out. And he's the kind of guy that I think he's kind of a boomer bust kind of guy, because you can say, it wouldn't work out because he's got an injury history with the shoulders, and he's a smallish guy. So, he's not a big guy. On the other hand, he has a great first step, just lightning quickness for a guy his size. He can be very disruptive. We heard at Ohio State him being compared to Aaron Donald, almost from the start of his career. And that's a really unfair comparison. Aaron Donald's one of the best defensive tackles to ever play the game. But that's kind of the mold that he's in, the undersized, quick, disruptive guy. And so you can see if things go well for Mike Hall Jr., the Browns will be thrilled with that pick. And you can also see if the shoulders become an issue, or if just the lack of size becomes an issue and he gets kind of plowed in the trenches, where that could be a problem. But a very interesting player. He went into the draft in part because he has a newborn son and wanted to be able to provide for him. So he was one of the few underclassmen that did go to the draft.
Yeah, I think your description, is pretty on the money as far as a boomer bust potential, because I think you could make a case either way for while he'll be a productive pro, or if we revisit his career in 5 years, you could see a lot of reasons why he would go either way. There's a lot to like about him as an interior pass rusher, that quick twitchiness and being able to be impactful that way. On the other hand, I think for somebody like him, you profile him as an impact guy in the interior, be able to get to the quarterback. In 2 years at Ohio State, he had 6 sacks, 4.5 redshirt sophomore year, 2022, 1.5 last year, 2023. I think just for somebody maybe who's going to be picked that high in the second round, you would want them to have shown a little more production, a little more on paper. But he's also really young. He's 21 years old, and there's going to be a lot of opportunity for him to continue to develop as a pass rusher. So,
and then the third guy taken had to be. I mean, he had to be. We know Kate Stover pretty well. I can just imagine him stewing as Big Ten tight end after Big Ten tight end goes before him. Eric All, who transferred from Michigan to where'd he go? Purdue? No, Purdue. Where'd he go? Indiana. Where'd Eric All transfer to? Anyway, he got hurt and didn't do anything really. He had the spinal surgery and back. That was knee surgery, and the Bengals took him. In the fourth round. A couple others went. AJ Barner from Michigan went, and then. So I can imagine Cade Stover going, I'm the Big Ten tight end of the year. And these guys who, especially Eric Hall, didn't do anything last year, go ahead of him. And he's probably thinking, just wait. And then he gets taken by Houston, which, the first thing everyone thought of was reunited with CJ Stroud. And I found the quote from the combine where Stover said, that would be, basically a dream scenario. And so I think he was more than happy to have slid a few spots in the fourth round to land with the Texans and CJ Stroud. That could be just an absolutely ideal fit. You have to know that CJ was probably in their ear, as the fourth round case. You got to take my guy. You got to take my guy. I mean, I don't know that happened, but it wouldn't be surprised if that happened.
Eric All transferred to Iowa and
Iowa, right? No wonder I couldn't remember him.
I will say the
black hole, but it's the Hawkeyes.
Iowa does have a good reputation for producing tight ends, and largely deservedly so. So that was a factor.
The only position on offense,
right?
And so they do some offensive linemen. They have, but yeah, yeah. I knew it wasn't in the end. I just couldn't lost my train of thought, but.
But Cade had twice as many receptions as Eric All last year, so I could certainly understand if you would feel that as a slight. But it's a good situation, as you said, being down there in Houston with CJ Stroud and a team that's certainly going to be really good next year. They've sort of gone all in and tried to accumulate talent, so it'll be good not only reuniting with CJ Stroud, but you're also going to be on a pretty good team. Yeah,
and then the fourth and final Buckeye take, it was Tommy Eichenberg. And he was taken by the Raiders. I could see him like with the old Raiders, in Oakland. The Las Vegas, he doesn't seem like a Las Vegas kind of guy. Hey, Tommy, you want to go to the casino? Was there film there? But he went in the fifth round. I think that's a little bit later than I thought. I thought he might be a fourth round guy, and maybe somebody would like him in the third round. But I think his lack of pure foot speed, I think that hurt him. I mean, there are serious questions about his pass coverage skills in the NFL. It wasn't his forte at Ohio State. But if you're looking up for a first and second down linebacker to play the run and just be a quarterback on the defense and a student of the game, all that kind of stuff, can't do any better than Tommy Eichenberg. So he's maybe a limited player in the NFL, but he's a good piece to the puzzle, I would think.
Yeah, I think you look at him last year in the Michigan game where he was matched up on Colston Loveland in some situations, the Michigan tight end who you look at mock drafts for next year, and he's somebody who's at the top of them, and Tommy losing those battles. It's not a case where it's a mismatch against a slot receiver or anything. You need to cover tight ends if you're a linebacker, and him getting beat in those situations is probably why he ends up being a fifth-round guy rather than maybe a third-round guy, just because I think teams are going to be limited in maybe being able to use him on third down. He might be more of an exclusively a first and second down linebacker. And also, too, it seems like in the NFL circles, the linebacker is not as valued as it once was.
That's true. Also, remember, he did play with he missed a couple games and then tried to play with a dislocated elbow. So, he missed some tackles in the Michigan game, at least one I remember in particular. Well, maybe it's because he had one arm. It's essentially playing with one arm. Remember the year before, he was playing with two broken thumbs, I think it was. And so you can't question his toughness, his desire to want to be out there. It's going to be up to the training staff to say, you're doing us more harm than good here, playing with one arm. So, for a fifth round pick, I think he's a potential steal. I'm not sure he's ever going to be a 3-down linebacker in the NFL, but the NFL is situational football these days. And if you can plug him in and you can be a quality player in certain situations, that's value. And then the surprise was that nobody else was taken. I mean, I thought Josh Proctor would be taken. Yeah, he's an older guy. He's been at Ohio State 6 years. He only had one really good year. That was his last year. I understand that. That's why he wasn't going to be a high draft pick. But he's got some skills. I mean, he'll hit you. He did put it all together last year. I mean, he really was good last year. And I think the other thing that might have hurt him, he's dropped a lot of interceptions. I think he only has one in his career, and he's had a chance for several more. So I think that was maybe a factor as well. But I still thought he would be taken. And look, there are plenty of guys who don't get drafted that make it in the NFL. Just because you don't get drafted doesn't mean you're not going to make it. But it's a tougher road because the team doesn't have that much invested in you.
I think for somebody like Josh Proctor, one thing that hurts him likely is his age. He's 25 years old. I think this was the case with a lot of the Ohio State guys who ultimately were not selected. Matt Jones turns 25 in July. Steele Chambers turns 24. I believe it's June. Xavier Johnson's 25. It's just an older group of guys, and I think the NFL looks at them as maybe having hit their athletic ceiling or maybe peaking as a college 5th or 6th year senior. And this is a class that was older in part because of the BuckeyeXtra eligibility waiver that they all got. They all got an extra year, which either helped some guys stay longer in college, like Josh Proctor and Matt Jones, or maybe it blocked the pathway to playing time for some of them. So I think that probably contributed to a few of those guys, but especially maybe Proctor, where he was at Ohio State for 6 years and finally the 6 year clicked, and maybe that sort of has an effect on him as well. The other thing for Proctor is the injury history too. I mean,
of course. But the thing, I understand what you're saying, and I think that's probably true. I'm not sure why it should be true, because if you're a late round pick and the team is worried about what the second contract's going to be, like more than 3 years down the road, I mean, get 3 years of value from a guy and then worry about it. I mean, your athletic peak is basically between 24 and 27, 25 and 28, roughly that range. Depends on the player and the position. But, Josh Proctor is only going to be 28 at the end of this 3 year contract. That's not old. And so I think you're right. I think they do hold it against him. I'm not sure that it should.
I think it's more of a thing whether there's more underneath the surface, whether there's more to be sort of
I get
their
it.
development, and whether they're ascendant as a prospect. I mean, I think it's certainly, I think the NFL for whatever reason just has a preference for younger guys. I mean, I think worked to Mike Hall's advantage on the flip side of that. He was seen as a much younger, and you look at maybe he wasn't as productive as Ohio State as you'd ideally like him to be as an NFL prospect. But the fact is, too, the NFL teams see them sort of somebody like that. There's more clay to mold, if you will. There's more untapped.
You see that even more.
The ideal situation is obviously somebody like Marvin, who's only been in college for 3 years, 21 years old, 2,000 yard receivings. That's ideally what you want.
The other player that wasn't drafted, I think, there were 4 that weren't drafted that we kind of thought would. In addition, Matt Jones, Steele Chambers, Mayan Williams, and Xavier Johnson. And, you feel bad for those guys, but the NFL draft is, you never know what's going to happen. Steele Chambers was a multi-year starter at Ohio State. I think he probably figured that he had a body of work that was enough to get drafted. Obviously wasn't the case. The one that kind of intrigues me as an NFL prospect is Xavier Johnson, partly because Xavier Johnson's kind of done it the hard way his entire career. He was a walk-on at Ohio State, started as a defensive back. Began his career as a defensive back, never really was a starter, but became a really, really good player. Just a guy, every time he got a chance, produced. And I wouldn't be surprised if, as a free agent, he does the same thing. That he gets into somebody's camp and just day after day after day makes plays and makes a team, and then does stuff. I mean, he did that throughout his Ohio State career. And I think he has a real chance to do that, as a pro.
The other guy, Xavier Johnson and Sam Wiggless, who played at Ohio State, transferred to Ohio and actually played quite a bit. So he's another Ohio State wide receiver who began his career as a walk-on before he ultimately left the program and went to OU. But he signed it also as an undrafted free agent with the LA Rams. So it would be interesting to see how both of those guys could stick, because being a second, third team guy at Ohio State as a wide receiver isn't always maybe the worst thing. I mean, as far as being a reflection on your ability, just because the starting lineup is so stacked. So I think following those guys will be certainly something to do here as they go into rookie mini camps and all that.
Right. And even as I'm watching the draft, and there's a long period of time between Ohio State draft picks, you couldn't help but think about next year. And I don't think there's going to be these kind of gaps next year. And I mean, we had Marvin Harrison go fourth, and then nobody went to toward the end of the second round with Mike Hall, then Cade Stover, and then nobody, and Tommy Eichenberg in the fifth round, and that was it. Next year, I mean, geez, we did a story on this. Hopefully you'll see it at dispatch.com. Just kind of listed the players who we think are the most likely to get drafted last year. It was a long little piece, because there are a lot of them. I mean, it could be, I don't want to put a number on it because you feel like you're limiting yourself, but it could be like 20.
The record, I think, for some perspective is to have it. Georgia set it 2022 after they won their first national championship with 15 NFL draft picks. So that is the bar that they would be trying to eclipse, which feels at least a possibility. Like you can't totally discount it. And Ohio State has had the school record is 14 set in 2004.
These are Little Caesars crazy puzzle.
I don't know where that came from.
That was my computer. I was trying to look up the record, and I pulled up the NCAA's website, and I got a pop-up ad. So apologies. You have information. It was interrupted though. I don't know what, but that is the record by Georgia, 15. Ohio State had 14 in 04. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, let's just kind of go through the list a little bit. We mentioned, Will Howard, both running backs, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, Donovan Jackson, Josh Simmons, Josh Fryer, if he has a good year, Seth McLaughlin at center. Emeka Egbuka is an obvious one. G. Scott Senior or G. Scott Junior. Sorry, Senior. G. Scott Junior. If he has a good year and has this Cade Stover's replacement, I think G. Scott Senior's time has come. I'm come and gone. I'm sorry, G. Scott Senior. You look at defense and you go, well, the whole defensive line: JT Tuimoloau, Al-Jack Sawyer, Tyleek Williams, and Ty Hamilton, and linebackers. C.J. Hicks is a third-year guy. Sonny Styles, certainly, I think the expectation is that this is his last year. Cody Simon, and then the secondary.
Yeah, I mean you look at a lot of guys can get drafted. I would pump the brakes on CJ Hicks and Sonny Styles both, because Sonny's changing a new position. He also graduated a year early from high school, so I don't think he has to.
No, I didn't have to. But I'd be surprised if he's back for senior year. But I was surprised a lot of these guys came back.
I wouldn't be. I mean, the thing is, NIL is allowing guys to stay in college
That's true.
later than they used to. I think so. When you're doing these lists, I think I try to be conservative, because I think it gets easy to just start naming guys. But you look at the guys who are going to get drafted: JT, Jack Sawyer, Ty. The 4 defensive linemen: Hancock, Burke. That's 6. So you're already starting to add up. I think it's not hard to envision being in double digits.
Yeah. So if Ohio State fans. I think most Ohio State fans understood and recognized what was happening with this year's draft. This is a prelude draft, and the next year is going to be a lot different. But if you are a very casual fan and thought, "Oh man, Ohio State only had 4 players drafted. What's wrong?" Well, nothing's wrong. Most of them came back, and so we'll see what kind of year they have. A lot depends on that, right? That's the key. But the potential is there for just a monster draft class next year.
Yeah, who do you think will be ultimately the the first guy pick. I think that's the other part of this. It's going to be a deep class, but I think it's going to be worth following, seeing who ends up being the highest guy, because you have some really good edge rushers and JT and Jack Sawyer. You also have some corners who are going to be of high value, Jordan Hancock, Denzel Burke. But Will Howard, I think, is a big wild card, because he was projected as a 4th-round pick. If he had come out this year, if he ended up winning the starting job and playing well, I think he could have a sort of a career arc that is similar to guys like Bo Nix, who hung around in college for a long time and then takes advantage of that extra COVID year of eligibility and sort of catapults himself based off that experience. But he would have sort of a similar arc, even like Michael Penix would be in that same group as Bo Nix, sort of that big super senior year sort of catapults them up draft boards.
If I had to guess, I mean, this is just a guess. I would say, based on the year they had last year, I'd probably say Denzel Burke. He had a terrific year last year. He's a confident guy. He's, I thought he was certainly ready for the NFL this year, but came back. I think either of those rushers are capable of having a huge year, Jack Sawyer or JT Tuimoloau. I think last year, if you'd asked me this time, looking ahead, I would say JT. But I think Jack Sawyer he really came on at the end of last year. On offense, Emeka Egbuka, I think, is considered he was considered probably a 1st-round pick this year. And so, assuming he has a good year, there's every reason to think that he would have, he'd be a high draft pick. I don't know that anybody is going to be at the top of the draft like Marvin Harrison kind of was. I'm not sure. And we'll see. I mean, that's why they play the games. But there's nobody right now, like we could project a year ago that Marvin was going to be what he was. I'm not sure that I would say that anyone's going to be a top 5 pick, but in terms of potential 1st-round picks, there are a lot of them.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting subject, fodder, all that, because there isn't really a clear-cut consensus, because I think you could make an argument for really, I think, any one of 5, 6 guys, JT, Jack, Denzel, Jordan Hancock, Emeka Egbuka. So I think all those guys, are in the conversation. I think I'd give a nod to Emeka, largely because of the position. And the NFL draft lately has been so focused on offensive guys, particularly quarterback, offensive tackle, and wide receiver. That's sort of the positions in demand. And I think that's where I would sort of set things up as far as sort of the expectations going in. If you were to be in charge of putting odds on the first guys to get picked, I think you certainly start with those 5. But I think it's going to be. But I think, to your point, Bill, unlike last year, there's no guy like Marvin who's clearly going to be a top 5, top 10 pick. It's going to be a deep class. But it's probably good for Ohio State in 2024 when you look at the talent on the roster. It's not just 1 or 2 guys at the top, but sort of a deep group.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those will be 1st, 2nd, 3rd-round picks. It's just a matter of where. I don't think that when I look at some of those guys, there'll be some late-round guys, but I think most of those guys that we mentioned have the potential to be top, 1st 3-round picks.
I think that's certainly all well and true. I think that also just about does it for our recap of the draft. Thanks as always for downloading and listening to the BuckeyeXtra football podcast. We will be back in your feeds later this week as we recap the transfer portal spring window, which closes Tuesday for undergraduates, Wednesday for graduate players. We'll sort of bookend spring as far as the activity for Ohio State, which has not been much, but if there's any last minute changes to the deadline, we'll be prepared and ready to recap that all for you. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Be sure and subscribe to the BuckeyeXtra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.
Just going to run this dog to see if we can find any type of human remains that are left.
Listen to Where Secrets Go to Die, The Disappearance of Derek Hennigan. From the Detroit Free Press, a new podcast set in the woods of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Available on Apple, Spotify, Freep.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.